One of the things that I found the easiest to do change management is when you have a culture of engineers who recognize that you're not really a true software engineer until you've taken down fraud.
All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. My name is Brad Hefta-Gaub, and our regular co-host Scott Porad's not here today, but we have a very interesting guest with us today, Dr. Adam Link. I'm looking forward to talking to him about lots of interesting topics. Adam, why don't you introduce yourself and maybe let the audience know a little bit about how you got here?
Yeah, certainly. So, yeah, like I said, Dr. Adam Link, the doctorate there is actually a doctorate in computer science, not medicine, but computer science. So, this is one of the few venues where I definitely get to use the doctor abbreviation because I earned it. Yeah,
Love
no.
it.
So I was a senior engineering manager at Coinbase, and worked at Coinbase for a number of years. I've actually since transitioned out of the technology industry very recently, have led teams across multiple continents, have led massive transformational change inside of companies, and those changes are highly technical in nature. Things like lifting and shifting the entire compute platform, lifting and shifting the entire compute architecture. I did over a decade in tech.
Yeah.
Well over a decade in tech, and about 8 years of that actually in the crypto space. So when it comes to massive amounts of change, we saw over the last decade, kind of crypto was the hot new thing, and then became institutionalized. Now, of course, it's AI. We have to talk
Yeah.
about AI at some point, but yeah,
Well, we didn't even get 5 minutes in, and we're already talking about AI.
well, of course, it's a technology podcast, and the zeitgeist is AI.
When you talked about change management and crypto, I thought you were trying to make a joke there about change and being
Oh yeah,
fintech.
yeah. No, that would have been a much better joke. Unfortunately, it is Friday afternoon, so my collection of dad jokes went out with this morning's stand-ups.
Love it, love it. Well, when I
Yep.
think about as a CTO, when I think about sort of like managing change management and change managing through change, there's so many things that can come up. Obviously, we've got you already mentioned the notion of like large technology changes. You also obviously are going to often go through organizational or management changes. Of course, there's a lot of like organizational let's say right sizing going on these days in our industry, downsizing, right sizing, however you want to say it to spin it for the audience you're trying to spin it for. And then we also have like sort of like kind of process change and culture change. I'm just kind of curious, Adam, when you think about like the challenges that we face as engineering leaders, where do you think there's commonality in change management, or do you think that different types of change require different approaches?
Yeah. No, I definitely think as engineering, leaders, our job is people, right? If you like tech and you only like tech, you stay an individual contributor, right? In most companies, at least those that I think are forward thinking enough in technology, they recognize that people management is a separate skill, right? Not every really good engineer wants to be a manager of people. And so it is a separate and complementary skill that you have to have. And so really at the end of the day, I do think change management with people is pretty much a skill that you can get good at, but the nuance comes in the culture of the individual company that you're working in, right? One of the things that I found when it comes to change management is that the culture of failure inside the company is one of the most important things. If engineers are failure adverse, right? They're scared to fail, whether it be technically or process wise or in a promotion or something like that. There's a lot of fear around a change, and that makes the change substantially harder because you have to actually get over the human fear before you even get to the technical good or bad or process good or bad and anything like that, right?
Yeah.
And so that is one of the things I found as a manager that kind of works across the board is your ability to provide what I call air cover, right? Which is basically you as a manager take the first hit for your team, and then you can kind of massage the message as it goes through you, And so if you provide air cover to your engineers, that also goes upwards. That when your engineers, make a mistake, right, you're able to massage that messaging going out to a VP or an exec level to explain why it's not the engineer's fault, right? And so that is something that we've had to do a lot in change management. It's just really massage messages when things go wrong, right? So you
Yeah.
don't have a bunch of engineers suddenly feeling like they got thrown into the bus.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think that like what I hear you saying, if I can play it back, is that a big part of change management is creating a space of essentially psychological safety so that the people feel like they can even hear about the change, they can begin to process the change, and not be in a reactive, sort of fearful state. And then I think what I hear you saying that a big part of like creating that safety within the team is being able to kind of manage in both directions and sort of provide a air cover, as you said. I think when I was early in my career, I used to describe it as like being an umbrella, you know, for the team.
Yes.
So they're not the ones
Yes.
getting rained on or whatever is coming out of the sky on them.
Yes, my team has often had that nickname for me, the blank umbrella.
Yeah.
That's my job, right? It's my job is just to make sure that they have a space.
But it's interesting too, you say that, and not to get too far afield from the change management conversation. Obviously, another challenge that we face as, leaders in companies that are naturally, working their way in capitalism is that we have an accountability to the enterprise too, to the stakeholders of the enterprise, be that our customers or our shareholders or kind of the community at large. And that sometimes means like managing through change that will be difficult and sometimes, hard for some team members.
Yes, that is very true. And I do think one of the hallmarks of being a good manager is your ability to go through those tough conversations with people. Whether it be a riff, layoff, a company right sizing, however you want to euphemistically spin it, or just terminations and negative performance reviews. Yeah, change management impacts people and impacts lives, right? And that is one of the things that I've actually had to go through, many times, right? Like any good manager, you go through organizational change as part of change management, and you find yourself in a call with an engineer and HR and you go, man, the rest of your Tuesday is going to be horrible. Sorry about that.
Right.
It's just business, right? Which is almost never true, right? It's deeply personal. At least the way that I practice management, right? I think it's deeply personal. You are impacting somebody's ability maybe to make the mortgage that month, or send their kids to school. And it's important to separate kind of your personal responsibility in that change from the organizational's responsibility, right? I think it's important to remember as a manager, being empathetic towards your team, going through those tough conversations. Like, yeah, you're impacting somebody's life, but at the same time, you also have to recognize that your manager would have the same conversation with you in a heartbeat if the company told him to.
Yeah,
Right?
totally.
And so it's like you've got to do your job, you've got to be empathetic, but also recognize that it's not your decision that led to this conversation unless you're the CEO, in which case it might be your decision, right? But even then, there's market forces at work that you may or may not have control over. And so, it's just it's one of those things like, yeah, you impact somebody's life. Don't take that lightly, but at the same time recognize that as much as you may be feeling like the bad guy, it's not you personally always
Yeah,
that's the bad
it's
guy.
the system.
Yep. And that's what's gotten me through some of those tough conversations.
Yeah, totally. Totally. The other thing about that is that you also have to kind of like typically I've been, look, I've been doing this for, more than 35 years. So it's like I've seen many termination or a, you know, riff or something like that. And, it's tough too, but at the same time, you also kind of one of the things that I try to hold on to is, well, we're trying to maximize the positive outcomes for as many people as we can, right? And unfortunately, that means that some people might have a negative outcome. But, if we don't make those tough decisions, then more of the team suffers, right? And so that's kind of one thing I try to hold on to. It's interesting. It is, to your point about like as an engineer, if you don't really want to do the people side of things, then you sort of like kind of need to stay on that IC route, and these parts of it, the sort of the challenging parts of dealing with other humans, those of us that a lot of us gravitate towards computer science because we like the kind of working with the
Mhm.
machine. And what have you seen in folks that like have made that jump into kind of the people management side of things? What advice would you give them about the things, the attributes that they probably would want to hold on to or to cultivate in themselves to be able to do that job well?
Yeah. So I'll take a very engineering focused response.
Sure.
Because yeah, I think behind every engineering manager is a coder who just wants to get back to being heads down and building again. And so the way I've often told people who've asked me this is, what's the difference between an engineering manager and individual contributor? And my answer is kind of tongue in cheek. And what I'll say is engineering managers, we test in production. As an engineer, individual contributor, you get to test in development, you test in staging, and then you push to production. When you know there's very few, if any, bugs in your code, you know how the code's going to work. As an engineering manager, I test in production. I have no idea how you're going to respond to the sentence I'm about to tell you. I have no idea if it's going to spin a whole downward spiral of cultural problems or a bunch of rumors or impact your work or conversely, give you a great new idea for a new product that leads to, a new revenue source for the company. I have no idea what's going to happen. And so the best I can do is test in production and manage accordingly, right? And so that means, when you're talking to engineers sometimes, like I'll tell them, look, give me a bug report every now and then. Look, if I'm not doing something right, it's just a bug report, right?
Right.
Treat management like a system, treat, the team like a system. And if you're dealing with a bunch of engineers, nobody gets upset because you submit a bug report, right? No one says, oh, you're a bad programmer because there's a bug in your code, right? And so I try to take the same thing as a manager is like, if you keep that mindset of like, just because something happens doesn't mean you're a bad manager. It's just a bug in the system, right?
Yeah.
Now, once you know about that bug, if you don't do anything about it for a couple of years, right? Like, well, yeah, now you're just a bad, bad manager, right? You're a
Right.
bad programmer. You got a
You
bug
got
report,
technical
don't do
debt,
anything.
technical
Exactly.
debt in your management operating system.
Exactly, right? But it's also it makes it really easy when you put it like that to an engineer who's thinking of making the transition because you can start to understand kind of the mindset it takes and just like there's risks of testing in prod, there's risks in management, right? Like sometimes you take down the production server,
Yeah.
and that means you might have a mutiny on your hands. Your team really doesn't like what you say, right? People yell. That's taking down production, right?
Yeah.
If you can wrap your head around kind of that equivalency, you as an engineer get to have an idea of what it is to be a manager before ever being there, right? And you can get a sense of like I'm not the type of person who would ever test in production. That is just not a thing I'm going to do. Okay, then maybe management isn't for you, right?
I think that's an interesting analogy. I definitely haven't ever thought of it that way, but I can see where you're going, where it's like, you have more chance of a reaction, and of course your wisdom, your experience is going to help you have a less likelihood of perturbating the system in a way that it's going to create a problem. But humans are, a little bit more unpredictable, let's say, than the code you write. So that's fair.
Yes, they are.
Do you think that like what are from your experience, what are some examples of like the most complicated or difficult or what's a example of a particularly challenging change management experience that you had and do you have any tips for how you handled that?
Yeah. So one of the things that, my background's in infrastructure, right? As an infrastructure engineer, most of the stuff I end up doing is infrastructure lifecycle management. And so at a certain point in an infrastructure's life cycle, you have to deprecate infrastructure. And ever since we've gone into the cloud, this has accelerated like beyond just deprecating a physical server to now, well, you got major minor version releases that change and all that fun stuff. And so as you do migrations in the cloud, it's a never-ending cycle of migrations in infrastructure. You're always moving from system A to system B. One of the most challenging migrations I think we did was in actually conjunction with a number of other infrastructure teams, but we lifted and shifted the entire compute platform of a large Fortune 500 company from EC2, which is just raw compute, to EKS, which is Kubernetes, right? So there's an orchestration layer in the middle, and obviously you can run code on an individual computer, but on Kubernetes, you are Dockerizing everything. It's all container based, it's all pods, it's all orchestrated, right? So you get a lot of benefits from a technical perspective of being able to shift workloads and not, worrying about underlying technology in the actual underlying server. But lifting and shifting an entire company's compute layer onto an orchestration layer is a massive effort.
Yeah,
Um,
totally.
yeah, that was about 18 months of work to do that.
Sure. And I think I can imagine like, if as I ponder something like that, like a lot of the different aspects of the change management there are going to be you got to get buy-in from so many people that are going to have, kind of pre-built expectations around the way it used to be, right? Like, well, EC2 is good enough. We got this far, why I need to learn this whole new system, it's Kubernetes is just like, a bunch of fluff. It's syntactic sugar. I don't really need that. We know our architecture now. Those types of reactions I can imagine would be pretty common.
Yes, they're very common, right? So as an infrastructure manager, I go into teams, and these are teams that are producing product, right? They are in the direct line of revenue. And so you come and you say, okay, look, so your Q3 plan, I know you're trying to launch a new feature. I know you're trying to capture market share. But while you do that, we are shifting the entire compute layer underneath your feet. And now your make file doesn't work the way it used to. I need you to Dockerize your make file. I need you to write a bunch of Helm charts. And I need you to get comfortable enough with Kubernetes that you can do basic operations to deploy your service. And this, it's poor engineers sitting there with a giant backlog of tickets going, you want me to do what now?
Yeah.
You're fundamentally shifting my entire service. It's not a fun conversation to have, especially when they're getting pressure from the revenue side of the business to ship product,
Yeah.
right? And here you are on the compute side, saying, hey, well, here's the cool new thing you're going to shift to. Now your application is going to run the same. It's still going to have the same latency. It's still going to respond with a 200, but you're going to do all this work, right?
Yeah.
And like, okay, now it allows us to scale. It allows us to shift infrastructure. It allows us to be more resilient, right? All this other operational stuff. But as a software engineer, you're like, cool, it still runs. I
Yeah.
just need to ship a product.
Yeah, totally. I think that like, okay, so that's a great example of a major like change management. And I think that like, kind of one of the things that you I think mentioned before we started recording is this idea that like, well, the technical, like maybe I can convince you of the technical thing. Like this is technically the right answer, but we overlook the kind of the psychological aspect of what that does for teams. Do you think that like, do you have any particular suggestions on how you've been able to approach that to sort of handle that behavioral and psychological impact?
Yeah, so this is actually something we had to learn maybe about 3.5, 4 years ago now, as we were actually doing this migration. So the two teams that were really involved in infrastructure, one of them was actually the compute team. So their job was the technical implementation of Kubernetes, right? They basically built the Kubernetes platform, and so it was great to have a very strong technical team that we could lean on the infrastructure side. So like the first thing is you got to have the right people in the room who know their stuff, right? Because there's nothing worse than bringing a massive change to an engineer and having them start poking holes in the technical implementation, right? Because now it's like, well, now they don't trust you and they're overloaded and they don't trust the tech, right? So we had a very strong compute team that was able to basically explain the technical aspects incredibly well, right? Like it doesn't matter if you're a principal level engineer, they could explain exactly why this is a good idea. And what my team basically did was the hands-on keyboard work for as much of the migration as we possibly could for these product teams. And so what we basically came with was a kind of an offer you couldn't refuse. And we found this worked very well with overloaded engineers. Because we'd come to you and we'd say, okay, we need you to change your entire compute layer. Here's the technical reason why, right? Here's the technical people you can talk to. But we're also going to come with an engineer that's going to look at your service and help write the first draft of the code to make you shift over to this new compute layer, right? And so it was something that we had to get really good at because you basically have to understand the service, you have to understand the blast radius, you have to understand how it calls
Yeah.
downstream and upstream. But once you have an engineer that can do that and write that first draft, even though it's not perfect, you've at least put forward a foot now as an infrastructure engineer to say, I tried my best to be a service and infrastructure engineer. I tried my best to help you as far as I could. And what we found with a lot of engineers is by taking that first initiative and at least giving them a draft pull request, even if it wasn't perfect, you give them something that they can react to. That allowed them to have that psychological safety of saying, it's not my code, right? Somebody else screwed it up if it goes down, right? And we on infrastructure, we're fine with that. We're used to taking down production. It happens. You get over it, right? And so, we were really willing to, put our our reputation on the line there and do our best that we could. So you get that psychological safety to the product engineer. You also give them the ability to react to something. The hardest thing before AI for us was crafting code, right? And so now you can review code instead of having to craft it. And that's a lot easier for a human to read code and point out the inefficiencies, right?
Yeah.
And so by putting that first foot forward and staffing my team appropriately so that we could actually go out and do that for the entire company, that really allowed us to get these product engineers on board. And then we basically tackled the biggest products we could first. So everyone after that would say, well, my product is super important. We can't change. And we'd say, oh, really? Are you more important than, the number one revenue products at the company? Because we shifted them
Right.
and it worked. Right. And so now you basically created this, 1-2 punch, like, well, you got to do it. We'll do the work for you. Here's some psychological safety. And if everything else breaks, you get to say, well, it worked for the biggest product. So I don't know what the heck happened here. It's not my fault. Right. So as a product engineer, you're basically covered no matter what happens. Someone else is going to be there to help. Right. So when an incident happens, you hop on and you're the service expert, but you're not the compute expert. You're not the
Yeah.
migration expert. Right. You got a team of people to help you.
Yeah. It's interesting. You were saying earlier about the idea that like how a culture handles failure makes, it has a big impact on this. And it does sound like this makes sense to me. I think that the times that I've been involved in complicated change management, it's always been harder in organizations that had more of a sort of fear-based culture, and in those cultures that are, I guess, more growth-minded as a culture, or sort of like not necessarily like risk takers, but at least sort of more willing to sort of accept that like stuff, like stuff goes wrong, like watch a team how they handle an incident, a data security incident or an outage incident. Like watch them how they perform in that. And if they do it in a way that's like egoless and like team oriented and like, hey, this was an opportunity for us to learn. Something bad happened, but that's okay. We're going to fix it and we're going to learn from it. And then that's going to give us an opportunity to do stuff better. If that's their approach, as opposed to, everybody's kind of like pointing fingers, then I imagine those are significantly different environments to do large scale change management in.
Yes. One of the things that I found the easiest to do change management is when you have a culture of engineers who recognize that you're not really a true software engineer until you've taken down prod, right? Like we all have our production went down because I merged dumb change story, right? And if you don't, like you got to get a story like that because it's just a rite of passage. But it
Yeah.
also really makes you, empathetic in situations like this and gives you a clear head because if you've done it before, there's no reason why that PR that merged was the PR that brought down prod. It could have been your PR. It could have been a hiccup, right? A network card could have died on a server and you had a singleton running on that server, right? Like stuff just happens. It's just
Yeah.
chance sometimes. And if that's why you took down prod, congrats, right? But in an incident, then you get enough senior engineers in there who just recognize this. It's not like I'm going to sit there and point fingers at you because it could have been my PR. In fact, it was my PR years ago, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
look, it happens. Whatever. We're here. It's past. It's shipped. Let's fix it. And then you practice what's called a blameless retro, and you go figure out what in the system broke, right?
Yeah.
Because if this PR broke it, there's no reason another PR couldn't have broke it just the same. So you want to fix the underlying problem.
Yeah.
Those are the cultures you aim for as an engineer because you're not getting fired for taking down prod. Right? If anything, you're getting a gold star for finally becoming an engineer.
Yeah, totally, totally. It's funny. You said blameless retro, and I'll tell a little tiny change management story of something I had to work through once. I actually I don't use the term blameless retro anymore. I've switched to using the term egoless retro instead. And the reason I've made that switch, and I explain it to people ahead of time, is that I worked in an organization where everybody was very adamant, like blameless retro, blameless retro. And one of the things that they unfortunately did was in the retrospectives, they essentially would redact all names. Okay. Or they would basically bristle if there was ever a TikTok or a timeline that said, Adam checked in the pull request. It got reviewed by Brad. It got put, they would be like, wait, do we need to put Adam's name on there? How do we put Brad's name on there? And I had to basically say, well, look, okay, first of all, we don't want to blame Adam and we don't want to blame Brad. Like you said, it's like, it's going to happen to any of us all the time, so we don't do blame. But if we completely eliminate like the factual information about what change made, what change at what time happened, and then what was the downstream consequences of that, Like if we remove the facts from the retrospective, we lose our ability to actually think critically about, oh, well, what do we need to do to improve? Like we fixed it. Great. Like once we get it fixed, right? Like no finger pointing. We're not finger pointing at any of this, but we still need to understand what actually happened so that we can have a meaningful root cause analysis and a meaningful set of improvement steps. And it was really interesting because that notion of saying, hold on a second, no one's getting fired over this. No one's going to get blamed for this. But we do need to be able to have a clear, accurate articulation of what actually happened. And in this organization that I was confronted with this, they were really skeptical of that and skeptical of the idea of like including that level of detail. And to your point, there's a little bit of a, at least in my experience, what I had to do in that particular case was a little bit of a lead with like the technical reasoning. Like, okay, let's just talk about the technical reasoning and why we need to change the way we're doing this. And hopefully, believe me when I say no one's getting fired over this. Like that, so try to kind of demonstrate that a little bit. And I think that I was actually, I've been fortunate enough to be able to say, to have made mistakes myself, to be able to say, like, look, here's an example of a very clean retrospective that has my name on it. I did the thing that caused the thing.
Yep.
And that's and maybe, maybe in leadership, like you're the VP and like, yeah, we're gonna do this like conversion from EC2 to EKS. Well, that was our strategic decision. I own that as the VP that said we're doing that. And yep, that had the falling downstream, you know, consequences. Anyway, that's my quick pitch for why I don't like to use the term blameless. I try to use egoless instead.
No, I like it, and I think at least in the way that I've seen retros done under the blameless term, but you do put names in there, right? Because it's important to document what happened, right? And at least with PRs, if you put, well, this PR changed it, well, look, your name's all over the PR,
Your
right?
name's on the PR, right? It's called get blame, right? Like
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
mean,
Get blame. Who did this? I mean, I can find it out real fast. But yeah, to your point about no one's getting fired for this, that's one of the things where, as a leader, you have that ability to really shape what happens behind the scenes in performance reviews, in promotion panels, right?
yeah,
And I've gone to the mat before for certain team members when a code change that brought about an incident was brought up in a performance review, and I basically said, like, you can't talk about that as if it was their fault, right? You can
yeah,
say their code was bad, right? That's okay, but you can't say that they caused an incident, right? Like we truly have to be blameless here, so you can't hold that incident against them,
yeah. I mean, at a
right?
minimum, somebody else did a code review,
Exactly. Yep.
right?
Yeah, it takes two, right? But yeah, as a leader, you really do have to, defend that in the culture,
Yeah,
truly to say that no one's getting fired for this. And again, this is the way that I practice management is, you got to practice what you preach. And if you say no one's getting fired because of this and they try to fire somebody, then you got to go find a new company.
yeah,
As a manager, if they're not going to uphold that and you truly believe that, then you as a manager owe it to your team and, your own integrity to go find somewhere else,
yeah,
right? And you got to be willing to take that line with folks that don't understand engineering culture to say,
yeah,
you do this, I walk. And you got to protect that team to protect that safe space. Otherwise, you ended up in a world where in a incident, everyone's trying to blame somebody else instead of fixing the code. Because you
yeah,
don't want to be the guy that merges the code fix, right? Or everyone
yeah,
wants to be the guy that
exactly.
merges the code fix, right? Like,
Yeah, and you sort of, in some sense, you sort of introed that as well, where it's like the job of a manager is kind of both managing in both directions. And I think that's a good example of managing up, where you've kind of got to say, look, okay, I understand you're really hot that the production system came down. Like I get that you're upset about that. I get that, that cost us $100,000. That's a problem. And we agree. That's a problem. And we need to look at like what are the like you need to know that if we come down on an individual, we're actually going to create an environment that doesn't allow us to do the other business objectives that you want. Like you want us to be moving fast and keeping up with our competitors or surpassing our competitors. And you also want us to do that in a way that's like safe and reliable and predictable. And so all those things require that psychological safety. So if you react negatively to an incident, then that's not helpful. Now, that being said, I also think that it's on us as engineering leaders to be like, take it seriously. There's a difference between saying like, hey, don't blame that guy and don't fire that guy. That's one thing. But to say, look, it's not a big deal. It happens all the time. Well, that's not an acceptable stance to take either, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's the business side of engineering leadership, right? Where you got to say, I get it. That was a really big whoops. And this is at least the way I've seen upper management, C-suite level work well in a company, is when you can shield your team and also take the blame yourself, right? There's a certain level where taking the blame for something minor doesn't impact you at all, right?
Yeah.
Like, yeah, we went down. I'll take the blame for that. It's a minor credibility, minor credibility hit to me, but it's not a career limiting, right? Like you're the right guy to take that, right?
Yeah, totally.
And at the same time, if it is a massive issue, right, and you are the CTO and the buck stops with you, then you got to have a remediation plan, which involves I'm going to call the CFO and say, here's the deal. We got to build in an error budget. Yeah, this
Yeah.
cost us money. We now need to change our financial forecasting, right? Because there needs to be a monetary side, right? And I get it, right? And maybe that means I can't hire headcount, right? Maybe that means that we can't, do a vendor upgrade. I get there's got to be consequences because money isn't unlimited, right? But then you also owe it to the company to build in that actual error budget, not technically, but
Yeah.
monetarily.
Or whatever the remediation might be, but the remediation has to be something. It has to be a change in process, a change in technology. Uh, I was working at this, actually Scott and I worked together at this health tech company several years back, and one of the most common production incidents that they would have is they had a third party authentication provider, and that third party authentication provider ha kept having outages. And so nothing was wrong with our software, but the third-party authentication provider would go out and then nobody could log in. And that was it happened like multiple times. And it was like, oh my God, we have another incident report that the root cause analysis is third-party authentication provider goes down, right? And the remediation couldn't just be not our fault. Like it wasn't us, it was our vendor, right? That's not a viable remediation, right? So, after it happened, more than once, it was like, hey, how exposed are we here? We need to come up with a plan that we can address this. And ultimately, that plan involved, yeah, we're going to have to like rip it out and replace it with something more reliable. And that was not a free thing. And so that was a good example where having a conversation at the sort of like C-suite level included getting the product owner to be like, oh, okay, the new features I want you to add, yeah, those are less important than people being able to use the product at all. Like they have to be able to log in
Yeah.
before those new features are going to be useful.
Yeah, exactly. We had something similar with a system that our finance team used, for book reconciliation, a small portion of their book closing process, but very important to the company. And yeah, this vendor, oh my gosh, they just had issue after issue with data processing, huge ETL pipelines that would go sideways and take 24 hours to rerun.
Mm,
Yeah, it was the first time it was like, okay, this is bad. Second time it was like, is this going to become a pattern? Third time it was, who else are you talking to in the industry? It's like,
yeah,
well, we've
totally.
already started those conversations.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
know, and it's good to have that, like, kind of fool me once, fool me twice. And by the third time, I'm having conversation with everybody else. Yep, we are actively searching for a new vendor, right? Like, because that is the right answer at that point.
Yeah, totally. There's two different things that we've talked about or kind of touched on in this conversation that I'm intrigued by, and I'm curious to get your take on it. Let's see. One of them is obviously like AI. Like it strikes me that this is probably one of the most fundamental shifts that the industry has been seen in a long time. And I've been around long enough to see the shift towards the internet and then the shift towards mobile and so this is like an even bigger shift. And one of the things that I've seen more and more, there's this, I think, dichotomy of people that are embracing the tooling and those that are resisting it. And this feels like a classic change management problem and a classic leadership problem. So I'm just kind of curious, what's your take on that?
Yeah. Um, the era of like the small batch artisanal crafted hand coded program is over. I remember, so you mentioned the internet. That was a little bit before that shift was before I was in work professionally, but I saw the mobile transition definitely happen. And I remember sitting down and you could work for 4 or 5 hours and come up with just these elegant frameworks. I did a lot of stuff in Python and JavaScript and just, the ways of orchestrating classes and, just overloading methods and all this. Like it was just like a symphony style, like, right? Like you just get to sit and like wax poetic as you create and like the creative energy flows out of you and you leave for the day feeling really just fulfilled um and now with AI, it's like all I do is I type into a black screen and AI comes back with words. And I read the words and I type it in again. And then it comes back and I swear at it and I say, do this differently. And then it comes back and then I review the code and I go, oh, what did you just write here? This is garbage. And then I merge it, right? Because it works, right? And we've gone from this like, small batch, handcrafted, gorgeous program to like, all that matters is the UI. I click the button, I log in, I move on to the feature works, cool, ship it, right? It's an assembly line and the craft is gone.
Mm.
And I do think that that is the future, unfortunately, right? I don't think that we're going to get points for doing handcrafted code
It's
that AI
interesting.
can spit out faster.
It's so funny you said that. So first of all, I'm going to push back a little bit. So the pushback is, what is the craft of being a software engineer? And I think that for sure, no one's typing curly brackets anymore. Like if you're typing curly brackets, you're getting behind, you know? So stop doing that. But I think that the craft of being a software engineer was always understanding the problem space and understanding the solutions that could solve that problem and being able to identify a good solution versus a poor solution, right?
Mhm.
And that's for sure what I think the teams that I see that are embracing AI, that's the strongest engineers were already the ones that were really good at reading other people's code because they knew what good code looked like, right? And they were really good at understanding how to like narrow the scope and describe the problem space. Some of those that became engineering managers, the best engineering managers that I know, were good at the people stuff, but they kept their technical strengths really strong and they understood how to describe business problems and how to read a plan and believe it, and then how to read the code and verify that it met the plan. And to me, all that is craft, and that craft is not going away. So that's my little bit of pushback. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you on the parts that are not going right. I have found I use AI extensively. Like my GitHub, year in review, like you can see, the PRs, right? And like, it lights up more green the more PRs you push. It's like fairly black, and then like AI happens and it just like lights up green, right?
Yeah, totally.
And as AI has gotten better, like it's gotten greener and greener. Like I can push probably 20 to 30 PRs a day, just me personally,
Totally.
right? And
Yeah.
it's just like, and some of that's just like fast agile iteration and stuff like that too, but it's just the speed at which you can come up with the feature, test it, push it, merge it, right? Like I can do so many more of those. What I've found in AI though is AI operates as a really good mid-level engineer.
Yeah,
I've
sure.
found times where my knowledge as a more senior engineer has been the thing that unblocks it, right? Because
Oh
you'll
yeah.
you'll notice it going down a certain path, and you'll be like, "What I want you to use is this architectural pattern." And it'll be like, "Oh yeah, you're totally right.
Right.
Of course I'm totally right, AI. You always think I'm totally right, right?" But it's like that like little shift of like the word you're looking for is this framework, right,
Yeah,
or this
exactly.
architectural pattern. All of a sudden, it's like, "Oh, I
Yeah,
get
but
it."
isn't that, but don't you see that? Does that feel like that's craft? That's you bringing the craft to bear, right? We already did this with senior engineers. We already kind of had them team up with junior engineers. We had them kind of doing the not necessarily the people management part, but they were expected to, you know, mentor. What was mentoring when mean anyway? It's essentially that. Like, that's a dead end. Don't go down that road. Try this. The framework you're looking for is this. The words you're looking for is this. Like, yeah, there you go. That's your craft, man. That's obviously what you'd be good at.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I think for me, part of slinging code was just the fun of writing the code and seeing stuff compile and like the little things like that. And that's basically out the window now. AI handles all that, but yeah, the higher level stuff of mentorship and architectural patterns and problem solving, like that is definitely still there, right? Um, Now I think AI is getting substantially better, and I don't know where we're going to be in 6 months from now,
Yeah.
right? It seems that literally every week there's something, new. Like literally this week, I just found out that you can take Claude and get a list of bullet points and drop it into Google Slides, and Gemini will make you slides
Yeah.
that are like gorgeous, right? Like I literally just saw that this week, and I was like, I did not know that last week. Last week I was making PowerPoint presentations. This
Yeah.
week I just made 3 PowerPoint decks using Claude and Gemini, right? So I don't know where we're going to be in 2 weeks.
Yeah.
But I think that some of the craft of being a software engineer will still be there. But certainly the writing code, at least for me, creating the architectural patterns, really understanding, and having created it and the hands-on learning, that part's gone. And I'm a little sad about it. But
Mm.
as a business-minded person who wants to get stuff out of my software,
Hmm.
like, oh, I love the fact that AI can write me an entire new, system in an afternoon. And that would have taken me 2 weeks,
Yeah.
right? Like I love the result.
Yeah. There you go. Well, we're all going through this change, so we're all going to experience it, I guess, differently. I'm trying to find a way with the engineers that I work with, the teams that I work with. I work with a bunch of teams that are just absolutely embracing AI, and they're, to your point, they're like, easily every single engineer on the team is producing, clocks is a bad measurement, but let's say 3,000 lines of real business value every day, and just like you said, just like that GitHub chart has just gone from light green to solid green every single day. It's just massive acceleration. And but I do hear this like, oh, I feel like the joy is, leaving it, and or it feels soulless, or I feel like I've lost touch with the craft. And I want to try to help folks see that, well, there's a ton of value in being able to guide the agent properly and get those results. And, you know, I don't know, maybe that's just because, I've been, I still get my hands dirty. I'm still writing code. I'm personally burning I just ran the numbers on this because Scott was asking me about it. My cursor daily token usage is like 20 million tokens a day on average for the last, couple months. So I'm cranking through producing a lot of code myself. But
Mm.
for most of my career, I've gotten a bunch of joy out of the craft of leading people to build things, right? And you kind of said it yourself, like take the accountability. Like if something goes wrong, take the blame. Like, hey, I was the leader. I was the leader that caused the thing that was here when the thing happened. Like I'm accountable for that, you know?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I think you ought to be able to take some pride in being the leader that helped lead the thing to get built too. And so maybe that's the way we shift our thinking of, instead of sort of having such affinity for the typing of the curly brackets and the tabs and the enters, right? Like
Right.
let's let's take some pride in the, yeah, you got the business outcome.
Yeah. And I do think that that is something that I've seen younger engineers struggle with because typically, coming fresh out of school with a CS degree, like you got a head for CS, but not a head for business yet. And I
Mm,
feel like, a lot of more junior engineers grow and see the business value. And it's almost one of the hallmarks of being a more senior engineer is being able to connect feature request with business value, right?
totally.
And so I feel like those skills are getting pushed down now to more junior engineers. So I think the challenge as a leader then is you now have to communicate the business value further down the chain into your team, right? Because it used to be just shut up and make the button, change color on hover. And now it's like, well, what does the button go in? Why does the button exist at all? What's the modal a part of? What's this entire page? Because that's the scope that AI needs,
Yeah, totally.
right? Button's going to change. That's an easy thing, right? Now it's like, well, what you're actually building is the checkout flow.
Yeah.
And how should a checkout flow work? And
Right.
explaining that now to a new grad is it's going to take a lot of additional coaching on the leadership side, right? Because now you got to explain, well, what's good checkout experience? What's
Yeah.
UX? What's UI, right? All these other things come into that. And, what is the value of another dollar to this business? What does that unlock? Why do we care?
Yeah.
Right? It's no longer just change the button color. It's like, well, now this is why we need another $1 million out of this checkout line,
Right.
right? And so
Right.
make it better.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. And also, I think that as you and I both are experienced enough that like knowing those architectural patterns, knowing those, knowing what good code looks like is something that it takes essentially, the 10,000 hours, right? The 10,000 hours to become an expert to be able to do that. So I do, I mean, definitely one of the things I wonder about is how do you get your senior if you still need senior engineers to like guide the AI, what do you do if you don't have junior engineers becoming senior engineers and getting those 10,000 hours? Like that's a that's a big problem too.
Yes, I have seen that. I have seen multiple companies no longer hiring junior engineers because AI can do that. And I'm sitting here, I'm going, you guys, we got a pipeline problem,
Right.
right? Like if you can't make a junior into a senior, eventually all those senior engineers in about a decade, they're going to be 10 years older. That's the
Right.
funny thing about time, right? And all of a sudden you're going to have less senior engineers if you never train up juniors. And then then what happens?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
So yeah, that's an unsolved problem. And I am seeing that right now. The other interesting thing you mentioned AI that I am seeing a lot more amongst engineers is just decision fatigue. I've
Yeah.
heard from so many more engineers now. By the time Friday rolls around, they are dead.
Yeah.
And I'm still diagnosing exactly why that is. Near as I can tell, it's you got a bunch of engineers who are now making management level decisions who are not used to context switching like a manager can.
Hmm.
And I think they're just getting burned out by Thursday and today. And so you get 4 days of work and Friday's gone. And I've seen that now for the past 3 weeks or so, right? So again, this is all changing very quickly. But that decision fatigue is especially affecting mid-level and more junior engineers, I think, more than I'm seeing it affect seniors. And it's just like, yeah, they can't make another decision for AI. They're just like, just code it, just do it for me. Don't give me a
Well, it's
decision.
funny. Yeah, totally, man. I think that's I think that's pretty insightful. I think that of course the anecdote I've heard to kind of counteract that counteract that is, oh, we'll do a better job of specifying up front, right? Like use something like Spec Kit or, some other SDD sort of oriented tool. Well, then you're spending all your time you know, writing and reading these very verbose documents so that the AI doesn't have to guess or doesn't have to ask you decisions. Now you're spending your time like really, really writing things. And there's a fair amount of I've seen many people pushing back on that. People like I've Scott and I were just talking about this the other day that product owners who like, oh, that the spec has too many words in it. And it's like, well, you know what? That's actually the level of detail you should have been providing to the engineers all along. Yeah, oh my God, that's a lot of how many users? Wait, there's 25 user stories here? That seems overkill. Well, okay, let's look at those
Right?
user stories. Is there actually anything in there that is not what you wanted? Oh, yeah. Oh, it caught some edge cases. Yes, I want it to do that. It's like, well, all those things that it caught, are things that would have resulted in extra time writing it.
Yes. Oh, yeah. No, it is. It's like this marriage of waterfall and agile, right? Like if you remember, like some of the early waterfall stuff, it was like we have this gorgeous, spec document, user journeys, data flow diagrams, crow's foot notation for the database. It's 50 to 100 pages. And you get it, and you're like, cool. What does this do? as,
Right,
as a software
exactly.
engineer, you're like, honestly, like, and the product person's like, I dropped off a 50-page product spec. I've done my job. It's going to ship next week. And as an
Right.
engineer, you're like, no, no, man, this is like a year's worth of work. You're just getting started.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
yeah, there you go. So this was enjoyable chatting about these complex issues, Adam. And tell me, how do you think we should summarize this for folks?
Yeah. So I think we are seeing a change with AI. I think we're going through a fundamental industry shift. I think a lot of folks are going to be learning management skills with agents instead of people. So I think there's a whole realm of management skills that your average engineer doesn't have yet that they need. I think business value is going to be the thing that defines a company that succeeds with their engineers from a company that doesn't. If your engineers understand why they're building what they're building, they understand the business impact, I think you have a world where AI will accelerate your company. But if you continue to keep engineers in the dark and isolate them from the customers, I think you're going to end up in a world where code can get produced very quickly, but your engineers have no idea what they're doing, right? And I think AI is then going to accelerate you into a place that your product no longer does anything useful.
There you go. Nailed it. Nailed the landing for sure. I
Nice.
love it. Well, this was super fun conversation. We'll include a link to your bio in the show notes. Anything else? Parting words of wisdom to the audience?
I think we've got a bright future as an industry. I know this year's been tough with a lot of layoffs, but I see a world wherein we have smaller teams producing better products
Yeah,
and fewer bugs. So I
love it.
think there is a light at the end of the tunnel.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, thanks everybody for listening to another episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast. Thank you very much, Adam, for coming along. This was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. And we'll hopefully everybody tunes in next week for another episode. See you guys. Talk to you later. This episode of the How Many CTOs Does It Take podcast was produced and edited by Saffron Hefta-Gaub. Our theme song was AI generated by Brad. Please follow us on all the social media platforms at How Many CTOs Pod. You can find us on YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Threads, X, TikTok, and Patreon, or at our website at howmanyctospod.com. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe on the podcast platform of your choice. Thanks for listening.